supported the Knoxville Permaculture Guild from like immediately, and came up to almost all of our meetups, and we tried to get out to Vuck Farm as much as we can. It's a little bit far for us, so we have to limit it, but I have learned so much about biodynamics, and hopefully you guys are too.
Thanks, man. Howdy, howdy. Andrew, are you recording this?
I am.
Okay, do I need a mic up? The mic for that?
You're good. You're fine the way you are.
Like this?
Yep.
Can everybody hear me like this? What? Bruce is here. You want to keep us all honest. Can you hear me, Bruce? Yes. All right, good. Put this back here. All right, I'm TJ. I'm from the Vuck Farm, which is halfway between Knoxville and Chattanooga. I've been growing bougie salad out there for nearly 15 years and inviting people to come and join me on my odyssey as I do so. And certainly y'all can come out when you're able. We try to have a regular event on third Sundays. They're like a volunteer day. We move compost into one of the market garden spaces typically. And we have these fun brick oven pizzas. And yeah, it's a good time. Do a farm tour. The Vuck Farm's only 10 acres big, but we have a lot going on there. And it's growing with leaps and bounds, it would seem. We got some new people on the property just this last week, and they're there for a big infrastructure push. So we're really looking forward to building out more of our designs. So, how many of y'all have heard of biodynamics and have some connotation of what it infers? All right, a lot of hands. Good. All right, so I've got a whole bunch of stuff set up over here that if anybody wants to go on later and start to have a biodynamic experience, there's like a laboratory exercise over here that goes along with the lecture. All right, so anyway, that's up and coming. David, during your session, we might have some infernal tapping going on over there if you don't mind. Okay, if you can suffer that, that would be appreciative. Anyway, so my idea is that, well, let me get into it. So, I was introduced to biodynamics back in the year 2000, and I happened upon it because there was a calendar on that tool shed wall at a little farm I was working at, and it had some connotation of when to do things on the farm in association with something going on with the moon. And this all happened to me out in California, and I've been in California for about 5 years at that time, and I grew up in West Virginia. And I was kind of out of sorts because there ain't a whole lot of hillbillies in California. And I wasn't feeling at one with very many things, and all that salt air just wasn't fueling my soul the way that I'd hoped to. So a friend of mine who kind of sensed that in me, he had given me some copies of the Foxfire books.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's some folklore from Appalachia, and they spoke to my soul, and there was an article in there about this thing called planting by the signs. And when in my forlorn moments of homesickness, I remember kind of poring over those books, and this calendar in the tool shed wall. It was like, wow, what's going on here? And maybe there's some connection there that'll bring me into this place better. And so nobody could really explain it that well, and they said, hey, if you want to know much about it, you got to read this book. And so I got this book, and it was a book called Agriculture, and it was dense. It was dense like dry clay. And so, if you're outside of that, the rest of this is going to sound like hokum, and my apologies for wasting your time. Take yourself on a short. But if you want to suffer some more, then here we go. So from that philosophy of we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, we can really start to consider the physical experience and the spiritual experience. And we can all really well articulate what our physical experience is, and some of us might be able to more generally articulate what our spiritual experience is, but this philosophy really goes into that articulation. And the particular version of this broader philosophy that biodynamic services is one called anthroposophy, and it was developed by a dude named Rudolf Steiner 100 years ago. That's when he died. And so he worked on this his entire life, and he died when he was like 65 years old or something like that. And towards the end of his life is when he laid down these like principles that became the biodynamic method. And one of the principles is about the management of your space. And that's kind of what everybody's considering, is they're considering coming in and coming into like a more meaningful management of a space. And that's one of the beginning points, is like, okay, we're coming in and we have our spatial consideration, and we want to kind of be able, for it to be able to take care of us, and for us to take care of it. And ultimately, there's some push-pull there and some balance there. And that's a really big task, especially if it's much space at all. And so we start to call, okay, what about this sustainability thing? We start to like layer up these systems so that this thing can take care of itself while it's taking care of us, right? We start to develop homesteads here. Wow. You know, all of that comes about. So biodynamics looks at that, but it also considers like the animal systems within the space and whether or not those animal systems are feeding the space appropriately. And so it's taking a broader view. And so that's like one of the principles of the viewpoint. And then to come into that relationship, because it's a spiritual modality, the biodynamic method, I think it's best explained as a system of ritual and ceremony. Because that's ultimately what it's really good for. Now our physical understanding of our reality is just like, oh, it's compost tea. We can do that. But there's something about the biodynamic stuff that's the compost tea makers still come to us to be like, can we keep the starter from you? Because there's something more to it. And what is it? It's meaning and intention that comes through this ceremony and ritual thing, ultimately. And so when I start to introduce the topic in that way, people can really start to glom on the weird stuff we're about to do right over there a lot easier. Because it's like, what is going on over here? Well, I'll explain it if I can. So we have this broader appreciation of the land, and this philosophy posits that the land and our relationship with it is there's a fourfold process therein. And there's this physical thing that's going on. And we can look at the rocks at our feet and we can say, okay, that's a really good representation of the physical beings. And they only have a physical nature. They've got nothing else. So that's one thing that's all over the farm, physical stuff. And then we have this other thing that we can consider, and we can consider the pasture. And the pasture is just a collection of grasses and other plants. And those plants have a physical part, but that physical part is enlivened. And within this philosophy, that's called the etheric body. But it's just that vital nature within the thing that all living things have. And so we have this physical body, and now we have this etheric body, and all these living things. And there are other living things on the farm, not just the grasses, but we have these animals, this whole collection of animals. And those animals are different from the grasses. And they're different because they have interactions. The grasses, they have really limited interactions. They can't move, they can't respond. But the animals too respond. And some of the animals even seem to have emotions. They're having a bad day, they're sad. So animals then have an emotional body to some degree. And we're just clever monkeys when it comes down to it. We're in that animal collection, but we're certainly not just animals. And ultimately that's because I know I'm you and you know you're you too. I'm me and you're you, that's how it goes. But animals don't make that relationship quite as readily because they tend to be herdish or packish, right? It's only the alphas that attain selfhood, ultimately. So that's like the viewpoint of the philosophy and the viewpoint of the organism that we're working with. We have a physical nature, an etheric nature, an emotional nature, the astral nature. And then this thing on top that's us is the ego. It's the higher mind, the self. What's my farm going to do that your farm ain't doing? Because my farm's badass. It is, actually. Anyway, you have to come into your selfhood with your space, ultimately, and you do that by thriving in your management. And that's kind of what the philosophy guides us towards. Oh, wow, that's a lot. That's good. Pretty great. I just can't do that. That's good. All right, so we have this idea of the birds. It's that birding time of year.
It's the sound of freedom.
This relationship with the land and the fourfold self of ourselves, and ultimately the space that we're allowing for, and then it's really an idea of how do we create a healthy organism therein that is our space. And so at my place, the thing that I've been doing is I've really been focused on this market gardening thing, because I think that the space and that taking care of me and me taking care of it, it's got to provide me a paycheck, right? I have to exist in the physical world with physical money. And so I have to do physical work to gain that. And for me, within my space, the thing that made the most sense for me to do was to do high value salad. So that's the thing that I grow ultimately. That's the thing that puts money in my pocket, is growing bougie salad ingredients. Nice lettuce, nice cucumber, nice tomato, et cetera, all those pretty things are there. And so that's the widget that I'm making in my factory ultimately, if you want to think about it more in that way. But to service that, I needed an animal component, so I have some dairy goats. And we manage them for milk as we're able. I don't always milk them. When I do milk them, I co-milk them, so I only milk them on the days I want to, pin the kids up overnight and then milk them in the morning. And we have meat animals that we'll buy as lambs or piglets or whatever, and cycle them through a season and harvest them in the fall. If that's something that we're doing, but that's all the things that we have done. And then there's a little patch of woods that serves just as a natural resource, even though we don't tap into the resource. It's just like that natural space. And then we have like our waterways and things that we're managing, and we're ready to do a big infrastructure project to put a pond in to like really kind of close out the ecosystem better ultimately. So that's the kind of thing that I've been doing at my place. With this biodynamic philosophy, like I said, I got into it 20 years ago, and I figured out that it was a method of being that serves the philosophy, and it had some really interesting, ultimately what I considered magic that went into it. And so one of the things is what I think of as earth magic, and then the other thing is the thing that I think of as water magic. And we're going to talk about the earth magic first, because we have to do that, and the water magic is really easy, and we'll talk about that later. So have any of you are familiar with the biodynamic preparations? All right, so there's these substances in biodynamics that are very specific to the practice of biodynamics, and they are called the preparations. And basically, they're a bunch of wacky little composts that you use as inoculants to make some rather really awesome compost. And one of the wacky little composts is made with cow manure and a cow horn. And to explain that a little bit better, before we actually get into it, we have to consider the cow. And so cows, like I mentioned before, they're emotional beings, meaning that they do have a sense of happiness and sadness. You would think, there's a content cow, there are unhappy cows. We like to eat the content cows, right? That's what animal welfare is about, eating the content cows, not the CAFO cows, the sad cows. So if we have these happy cows, then what we're considering that looks like for a cow is that it's out there on a pasture of this beautiful lush grass, right? And maybe there's some dew on it. Maybe there's just the right amount of dew. The cow doesn't even have to bother drinking water. I've noticed my goats do that. And when the grass is really lush and the dew's heavy in the morning, I never add water to the trough. And so I imagine a cow would really like that. If it was oh, water, I can just cleanse my palate when I want, maybe, but that's all. But yeah, otherwise it's a pretty happy cow. So what do cows like to do? They like to just chill and eat grass. I mean, that's what they do. What do cows think about? Probably about chilling and eating grass, because that's what they like to do, right? So we have this cow, and a lot of its consciousness is really focused on its inner being and what's going on. And if we consider for a moment what is going on in that cow, it's wow. There's a whole lot going on in there. There's 4 stomachs worth of stuff going on in there, right? 21 days worth of activity going on in there. Not quite as simple as us, right? If I'm feeling regular, I'm feeling regular. Cows aren't like that. All right, so the idea of that whole track that I was going on there was to present this notion that this emotional being is taking in this etheric matter. And that grass, as I was explaining it sounded pretty happy too. I mean, as happy as grass could be, dew-covered and lush and just wonderful, right? It's in its perfect state of being, and then we're going to put it in this cow, and the cow's pretty happy. Maybe it's near its perfect state of being, and it's going to go through that cowy process, and then something comes out the other end. And that is the product of consideration, because it is the thing that the cow was considering for 21 days, right? And so we're going to take that, and then we're going to do something magical with that. And before, we got to talk more about the cow. Features on their heads, the horns. Now the horn material is a lot like fingernail, and they have something similar on their feet that does something similar esoterically, and it's also made of the same material. And so they're walking around on this, and then they've got these things on their heads. This thing on its head has this very interesting kind of vortex kind of feature, right? This is like the kind of quintessential kind of spiraling of the horn. You know, certainly other cows, they have a straight horn, they have a more curvy horn, but you can kind of see like this kind of vortex is like kind of archetypal of the horn. All right, so if you have the chance to take the horn off of a cow's skull, okay, you see it's a sheath, and inside of that sheath there's like a bony membrane, and that bony membrane is an extension of the sinus cavity. And basically you soak the thing in water and then it unlocks, careful, and then you can see the inside. And so the interesting thing about the sinus cavities is that's like when we're breathing and we're like we're experiencing the air in our environment, right? Then we can say that our sinus cavities are active in that process, okay? When we're really deeply sensing in to our environment with our nose, we can say that we can start to feel something going on in our sinuses. So if you were a cow and you had sinuses that literally were an extension of your freaking head, you can really do some consideration about the things that you're smelling and eating, all right? So we take this well-considered grass now that's been astralized, that came out of the cow, and we're going to put it into this nitrogenous sheath. And then within this philosophy, nitrogen is a source of protein, right? Everything that has protein is highly nitrogenous. Nitrogen is considered the carrier of that etheric force, all right? And so this is why it makes sense to me, is if you have a green space and you want to make it greener, increase its vitality, you throw nitrogen on it, right? Even if it's nitrogen salt, it's like, bam, it'll flash out and make green for you. If you use a slower release nitrogen, it's a more sustained burn on that nitrogen. But that's why, in my sense, it's like they didn't know that 100 or 200 years ago when they made this stuff up, that nitrogen fertilizer made things green. They were really going from some esoteric magic school when they said that. And it's like, oh, now the science is proving that all that wacky voodoo shit is really true. So that's why I like it. So all right, so we have our keratinous sheath. Our basically what we have here is a reflector or a shield from that process that was coming out. That's what was happening with the feet. There were like these reflectors to insulate the cow, so all of those inner processes weren't just flooded out into the earth and up in here in the head as it's going up into its head processes. They're reflecting it back into the cow, so they're just not raying out. Like us with our thoughts, if we ray them all out of our mouths, then you just become we're just talking, and people are like, do something. You can't just talk. You have to do. So cows have horns because they don't talk. They're raying all it back inside. All right, so we take our astralized manure and we put it into the horn, and we set that horn into the ground for a period of 6 months. Now the time of year is very important, and this is that time of year. That's where I brought all my horns. And the thought is that doing it in this time of year, because this is the drawing in of the energies. Everything that's out and about and living is like coming in its dying phase. And all of us as agriculturalists have been bringing in the harvest and bringing in the harvest. And the cold nights are coming, and everything's going to be held within during that time of long nights. So that's more of the time of inner consideration, not only for ourselves, but the earth is doing that too. And so that's why we put the horns in the ground at this time of year, and then we bring them up closer to Mother's Day when things are blooming and everything's like lush and becoming. So that's the physical process, but I promised you that we were going to do some magic. And that's Sounds kind of witchy, don't it? But the real magic is in the ceremony and in the intention that you carry forward with this very specific thing that we're going to do. And that comes back to the love that we give to the land in order to build our dreams. To come into the co-creative manifestations that we want to be, that takes a lot of inner will. And that will has to come from somewhere. And ultimately, it must come from the passion within. And that's a love thing, right? Passion. So it's that love that fires us forward, right? So that is the idea that we're putting into the horn, ultimately, as we're tapping it down, packing it with our little spoon. We'll do that in a little bit. And then we take that love and that intention and we put it with our blessing into the land so that then the material that comes out of the horn the next year will be used as a blessing for the land. Now I brought some of that. It's back there on the table. You can all take a handful home if you want. But what I really hope we get to do is the water magic, because you do that with that stuff. After you do the earth magic with the horn, it comes out and you get to do the water magic and stir the preparation that you've made into a spray with more intention. Oh man, wait till we get into that. And then we cast that out onto the land as our blessing. And that's basically the gist of the big half of the biodynamic method. There's this whole really cool composting thing. There's a whole bunch of wild stuff that goes on with that. And compost is made to like increase the humus, and the humus is considered like the humus in the soil is kind of considered the etheric and astral body of the soil itself, because that's where all your biology is. There's a lot of life activity. You want to work with those life processes, but also you have to be respectful of that life. So there's this energetic and emotional concept up there. And so for me, talking to a room full of people like this, I'm going to admit I haven't read any permaculture books. I haven't. But everything that I've done on my property over the last 15 years seems to be like in line with the principles. There ain't a whole lot of design going on, so there's a lot of go back and fix it. But it's a work in progress. It's coming along really nice. So that's really kind of the gist of the philosophy that we're going on. How are we doing on time so far? I want to get into this next thing. 11:51. Okay, cool.
37.
All right, so the next thing is to actually make some of the biodynamic hormone. My idea is to come together to like share and give and whatever. So I wanted to like take some of that energy home with me, basically, in those horns. Okay, but what the point of that set of horns will be next year was that will be material that will be readily made available to this community, not just you individually, but more broadly, as like the beginning land blessing impulse that we can like spread all over East Tennessee, all over Tennessee, all over the Southeast over time. But I mean, that's really the thing that I'm hoping that we can start to work towards. So to that end, if you want to like think about packing some of the horns, we can start looking at that as like a technical activity, but also as an activity to finish. And then later on, after lunch, we'll do the stirring exercise. I want to explain the stirring exercise because that'll just be something that we do. And the stirring exercise, there's a little bit of, that's the water magic part. So after we get the preparation out, I'm going to go get a handful of the preparation so that we can consider it for a moment. How am I doing so far, David?
You're doing great.
Thanks.
Taking notes.
And yeah, you can play with it, smell it, right? And then, so what you do with that stuff is you get yourself a bucket of water. And, oh, sorry, I'm gonna sit down here, Andrew, sorry. You get yourself a bucket of water, and it's nice if the water is not tap water. Rainwater is best because that was provided to you from the cosmos. And then if you don't have rainwater, at my place, well water, and so we'll leave the well water out in the sun to get interacted with light, basically. And so you get your water, and if you can easily warm it, a little bit of it, all the better. But I like to prepare my water the morning of or the day before, and just let it set out in the sun most of the day. And if it's in a colored bucket, it takes the chill out of it. And so you have your water that you're bringing into your space of consideration, because this water magic thing is basically, it's an exercise in intention. And the scientific background for my understanding of how I think this works is based in a Japanese guy's, Masaru Emoto is the guy's name, and he did some research on snowflakes back in the mid-90s. And his fascination with snowflakes caused him to take pictures of snowflakes to like look at the patterns within the snowflakes. And so he started looking at water quality and snowflake patterns. And he definitely saw a definitive difference. Clean water, pretty snowflakes; dirty water, ugly snowflakes, right? And everybody was like, wow, figures. And then he was like, all right, well, I'm going to take the clean water and I'm going to think about it. And he thought about it and he took some pictures. And he thought about it again and he took some pictures. And they were coming out different. Different thoughts, different pictures. And then he had some other really thinky people think on the water. And they came up with some different pictures. And so he really created this body of knowledge that has become a body of understanding, is that the thoughts that we project onto water have an effect on the water. That's why you find so many water bottles with namaste on the side of them. It really is. So with that in mind, that the water is now our carrier of something that includes our intention, and we're coming into this with a whole lot of intention. Look at all this stuff we've done to get here. We've got our water, and we're going to start to stir this material into the water. Now, the way you stir it is just to blend it well, ultimately. That's what you want to do. But you can get real particular with it, and I'll show you my secrets. But before I do, there's some backstory, because I'm about to tell you my like incantation. I got to explain that part. So, the whole notion of the co-creative manifestation that we're looking for is that we are partnering not only with the land, but with the spiritual beings therein. Now, I spoke very intentionally about the living beings on the land, but then there are all these other things on the land, this philosophy of scribes that are there. And one thing that I think that most people will kind of be okay with is this idea of the formative forces. Like there is like this whole like earth, water, air, and fire thing going on out there. And it's like, well, those are all things. So we can consider how they come together and there's these interactions. But within this philosophy, those things are ascribed personalities. And those personalities are the spiritual beings. And so those spiritual beings, generally speaking, are called the elementals. And so you come into co-creative relationship with the elementals in your co-creative space, ultimately. And the way that you do that is through this relationship of earth and water magic. There's some air and fire magic with it too, but to learn that you'll have to come out to the Vuck Farm, I reckon. So now we've got our water, and I explained to you a little bit about the elementals, and then what's the next part? Co-creative force. Okay, yes, okay. So now we can do our incantation. Oh, so what I like to do is I like to take a big handful of the horn manure preparation, and and the way that it functions is once we make this spray, is it functions as an earth activator. And the action that it has is that it enlivens your place, and it really starts this upward thrust from below. It starts pushing things up. The elemental beings below, which are basically of earth and water, few of the air, not so many of the fire, are down there doing a lot of this. Okay? And that's what the horn manure is for, is to fire those guys up and really get them doing something. So that's half of the land blessing exercise. There's like the upward, and then there's this thing coming up from below, and then there's this thing that's drawing up from above. And that one is another one that's called the horn silica. Now we don't get to do that one today because you make it in the spring and you bury it in the summer and you pull it up in the fall. But it's looked at as a light blessing. And you put it down very specifically in the dawn of the day when the light is new. And you play it to the space to like present the light blessing, and you ensconce a new relationship with the light over that space through this ceremony, ritual kind of thing. So that's the two halves of it. Otherwise, they both work similarly in the stirring method, so let's get into that part. So I've got my handful of horn manure, and the way that I stir it is I get it going in a vortex, like the horn was, really deep vortex, all the way down to the bottom, really winging it around and around and around. And then I'll take that hand out and I'll thrust the other one in and I'll make it go the other way, right? So it goes into this chaos and really gets churning, and you can be like, I'm really mixing it good now, man. That's part of it. You got to mix it good, right? So I'll get it winging around, and one of the ideas about a vortex, and all that water moving around in the same direction, in the same way, it starts to organize. And that organized principle and that water then is better able to receive an intention, right? So when I'm really winging around there and I can see all the way down to the bottom and it's like staring back up at me, I know this is the magic moment, and I say my incantation. And my incantation goes like this. Through elemental action, co-creative force is molded by love, so that the earth may be healed. And that last bit is like traditional biodynamic stuff. They got all fired up back when we started dropping atomic bombs on each other. And they said that we were destroying the etheric body of the earth. Well, I can see how those folks 70, 80 years ago thought that, and I can agree that our nuclear holocaust has become one of the penultimate indicators of our technological advancement, and how that technological advancement comes with some quagmires that we ultimately need to be consider addressing. And I think that for a lot of us, the ways that we're addressing that is to come into more meaningful relationship with the land, right? And try and leave all of that noise behind. And so that healing of the earth is really to invite that, to come into a real relationship with the land, a living relationship with the land, and that is the thing that will heal it, is our love in this space. Figuratively rebuilding the Garden of Eden. So then we'll stir it and stir it and stir it, and we stir it for at least 20 minutes to really allow, and it becomes a meditation over that time. And then after that 20-minute period, we'll take that, the earth blessing, we take it out in the middle of the afternoon and cast it out like in rain-sized droplets. It has a homeopathic effect. Who's familiar with homeopathy? Right? Sugar pills? Come on, right? Anyways, works the same way. But you put it out on the land, and that energetically, it carries that blessing forward. Now, there is compost in there, so you can say, oh, there's stuff, and people with microscopes like to look at the stuff, and they really think the stuff in there is cool. I don't go off on that. I think about the rest of it, because I feel like that's what's really happening. So anyway, that's how all of that works. I guess who wants to get into it? And do anybody want to get their hand dirty before lunch, or who wants to like wait till after lunch with that? You know? All right. Any random questions before we get on the crafting of the horn manure? All righty then. Here we go. So, the way that it works is we have our prepared manure, and what we did to prepare it was we ran around the cow field, and we found what we were hoping were cow pies and not gold pies. Yes, there is a way to tell that. We take the cow manure, we took it back to my place. We got it from the neighbor's place. We took it back to my place, and we stirred it for an hour to potentiate it and put all of our love and connection into it at that moment. And we did our little mantra over it, and now it's here for us to consider. And so the method is you put some manure in there, and then you tap it down into place. You want to get it firmly seated. You need to get it firmly seated in there, and that takes effort, right? Because ultimately, all of our co-creative manifestations require effort. And so you can't pack that horn manure in there willy-nilly. It ain't going to work out that way.